Welcome everybody, this is the SharePoint Patterns and Practices General SharePoint Development Special Interest Group. I'm not sure if the SIG statement is super obvious, but it means a special interest group and it means a community calls. And these are bi-weekly calls around SharePoint general development like provisioning, CSOM, PowerShell capabilities, and then talking about general SharePoint development also on server side. We do have another bi-weekly call, which is the SharePoint Framework bi-weekly call, where we talk about the client-side development and those topics more. So anyway, on these calls, we will actually talk about the SharePoint kind of end-to-end automation and solution designs. That's part of this call, and rather than the SharePoint Framework, which has been more concentrated on that another call. There's two addresses on this slide. There's MSSP PnP Community. That is a link to the tech community site, SharePoint Dev site, where people are having discussions and answering on the questions around SharePoint Dev. And then there's the MSSP Dev Docs, which is our official documentation location. I'll cover that one in upcoming slides as well. Because I promised to keep that slide in my presentations until end of this year, at least. Now, let's actually get going on today. So, my name is Vesa Juvonen. Just to quickly introduce myself as well. I'm a senior program manager from SharePoint Engineering. Technically, it is OneDrive SharePoint Engineering, but don't get fooled. It's not going to actually. It's just our internal organization. So, if you ever see ODSP, that means OneDrive SP Engineering, but actually, it just tackles both of them. And I work in the team who's responsible of the end-to-end development experience within the SharePoint. So we ship SharePoint Framework and all of the other APIs. Now, before we actually go to today's agenda, if you are interested in getting more closely involved within this community, please reach out. For example, if you want to do a live demo on certain functionality or other topics. If you want to just participate and listen or watch the videos and the recordings from YouTube channel, absolutely fine as well. Now, you can always contribute in GitHub based on the issue list issues or having a contribution or reporting issues which you might run into, or then fixing certain things what was broken. That is a great suggestion from Rolf. But as they do a demo in a community call. So if you're interested, please let us know. And in general, please provide feedback. We in SharePoint Engineering, we absolutely love your feedback. We need to understand if there's something which isn't working properly or something is broken, please let us know. Don't assume that somebody else has already reported that, because if everybody assumes that, nobody's going to actually tell us that it's broken. So, but let's get back on that one in a second as well. Now, on today's agenda, I have few slides, and Gautam, let's not talk about what happened this week. So I have few items on the agenda, and I'm going to have few slides going through the general, let's say, the SharePoint announcements and few updates. So there's one really big update, which I just pushed live in social media like 10 minutes before. And then we have three different demos, super cool demos. So we'll talk about using async option with the new SharePoint Online CSOM NuGet package. So this was released in January 23rd or something like that. And Radi is going to do a live demo. What does it mean in practice when you're writing managed code using the CSOM? What does the ExecuteQueryAsync, what does it give you? What does it actually mean if you want to use that in future? Then we'll have a preview of upcoming cross-platform PowerShell Core 6.0 version of PnP PowerShell. So obviously, sorry, Irvin, the father of PnP PowerShell, is behind of this one. So Irvin is going to do a live demo. What does that mean? And talk about the progress on that side. This is the first time we're actually talking about this one openly. So we are looking into porting or transforming the existing PnP PowerShell also to PowerShell Core 6.0. Reason is that the PowerShell Core 6.0 is actually cross-platform PowerShell. Now, we already have an Office 365 CLI, which is a one option, but also the PowerShell Core seems to be growing an interest across the community. So we're looking into having some of the existing PnP PowerShell functionalities ported over. It's an early preview. Irvin is going to talk about also the progress on that one and what's going to happen next. But it's an early preview, and let's see when it actually goes live. It does not replace existing PnP PowerShell. It's a complementary framework on top of it whenever we get it actually out. And then the final thing is consuming SharePoint data with your customization using Microsoft Graph API. So what's actually supported and how to access the SharePoint data from Graph. If you approach SharePoint development from a SharePoint API perspective, then maybe this isn't really a super interesting topic, but if you come from a Microsoft Graph perspective and you want to access SharePoint data, then the access points and access, the way we are accessing the data and files and items in a list is exactly the same from an authentication and process perspective. So Paolo Pialorsi is going to walk through that one, and he's going to join slightly late today. Now, some practicalities before I go my quick intro and we leave the audience for Ruddy. I need to personally, unfortunately, drop from this call immediately when I'm done with my intro section, but Bert and Ruddy and Irvin and Paolo is going to take good care of you. So I'll be back absolutely next week in the SharePoint framework call and bi-weekly in the future as well. I'm a judge in a Arctic Cloud Challenge hackathon in Oslo, and we have a judges reviews on the solutions after day one on the topic. So I need to actually go and have a look what our attendees have actually created during the day. Anyway, that's enough about me, and let's actually move on the other topic. So, quick reminder, MSSP Dev Docs. Like I said, we will keep this in our slides always, so people will understand that the locations have changed and they will remember the address. So, MSSP Dev Docs, it will guide you, or docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint/dev will guide you to the official SharePoint development documentation. We're looking into having quite a significant changes there and additional investments on the documentation. So really going through the existing documentations, for example, inside of the SharePoint adding guidance and drop update everything and make sure that it's still up to date. SharePoint add-ins, absolutely suitable solution in the future as well. But we're more on those changes slightly later. But this is a great platform. If you find a bug, if you find an issue, if you want to contribute, if you want to add something on an existing platform, you can actually do that within a GitHub platform, in a GitHub by clicking and edit on any of the page, and then you can submit your suggestion to us, which is a great way of contributing. Now, the other thing what I'm starting to keep always on these slides and presentations is the MSSP Dev Issues. So, if you run into a random issue, like earlier this week, I'm going to tease myself, I can't go to technical details on this one. Earlier this week, we had some issues on activations of SharePoint add-ins and SharePoint framework solutions within the SharePoint Online, which existing solutions were working properly, but you were unable to install new solutions on the sites. We did have a nice discussion, and people were reporting that issue in issue list, and they reported that also using other official channels, and we were able to then update the progress on the issue list for the people. So please, if you find an issue, if you run into something strange within SharePoint Online, please let us know. So we're able to then track that internally. We do triage these issues frequently, and then we assign them to our engineers. Now, final thing before I give the audience for Ruddy and other people, and I need to drop from the call, unfortunately, like I said. Today, we are officially announcing site designs and site scripting. Scripts are now gradually moving to production mode. So we're right now in 50%, roughly. And in the production level, or in the production, but actually probably in 70%. We were 50% like 20 hours ago. So pretty soon, within a day max, roughly, you will have the site designs and site script capability within your tenant, even though you would not be a targeted release tenant or a first release tenant. So this is now going to be available in production use in SharePoint Online whenever the rolling is completed, which, like I said, we are already roughly in 70% worldwide, which is great. So we're able to start building these capabilities. Documentation is available, MSSP site designs. There's like 6 or 7 articles which are explaining different options, how to do the customizations purely in JSON, or how to extend the engine by using Azure functions, for example, using PnP engine there. Super great stuff, because now you're able to start using this in production with your customers or within your tenants. Cool. Thank you, Ruddy and Ryan and Raymond, for the icons. Righty, I wasn't aware of that icon existed in Skype. Cool, excellent, absolutely brilliant. Super excited on getting this one properly out, and super excited to see then what are you actually contributing. We do actually have a GitHub repository, which is referenced also in our existing documentation around site designs and site scripts, which contains sample definitions and site scripts, and which you can reuse. Or you can, if you build your own site scripts, you're able to contribute that for somebody else to take advantage as an example for their implementation. So please take advantage of that option as well. Cool. Quick update on the roadmap. So this is not going to take too much. It's the classic slide. We do apologize. We've been hitting some late obstacles on the additional Microsoft Graph support, which was originally planned to go live in January. Now we are getting super close, but there are certain things which we still need to adjust. We're still looking rather, how would I put it? Potentially we're looking rather days than weeks to get more Graph support out together with the third-party web API calls from SharePoint Framework. So it's coming super soon. Hub sites and Hub APIs coming potentially this month, like the Groupify APIs potentially in this month. We have not yet been able to lock down the exit schedule because we're still certain details on that. But Hub sites and Hub APIs coming to preview, more Microsoft Graph support coming to preview, and Groupify API coming to preview, hopefully all during this month. Exact date unclear at this point. Cool. Demos and topics. So, like I said in the agenda, so Roddy is going to start around the async option in the new SharePoint Online CSOM NuGet package, which was released 2 weeks ago. And then we move to Irvin around the preview of the PowerShell Core version of PnP PowerShell, and then Paolo is joining probably right about that time, and Paolo is going to do the last demo around accessing SharePoint data using the Microsoft Graph APIs. And it is a good discussion also around when would you use those versus the native APIs. So please have a great discussion on the iron window as we move along today in these demos. Roddy, please start sharing, and we can see that everything is working fine. And at that point, I will have to then drop away from the call, unfortunately.
Thank you. Thank you, Vesa. Have a good day. You can see my screen? No?
Let's see. Loading.
Still loading?
So, yep, I actually got it. Let's double check this one. Quickly answering on Tarun's question, any update on site collection API app catalog API? Collection catalog API. Activating the apps through that. There's an update on the issue list on that one. By the way, screen sharing works, which is good.
Yep.
So we're able to actually do your demo already. But well, I don't have an exact update on the collection app catalog API, but we are resolving some of the issues, known issues around there within days as well, whenever we get the latest versions to SharePoint Online. Now, for this moment, Roddy, take it away, and Bert, Roddy, and Irvin is kind of our hosts until the rest of this call. I need to unfortunately drop, so thank you, Roddy, and Irvin and Paolo for your demos beforehand, but we'll be absolutely in touch.
Thanks. So January new CSOM version has really cool new method here, ExecuteQueryAsync. It's been added. So I wanted to quickly go over async as theory. So I'm just going to skip the slide about me. It's not that exciting, and we're recording as well. So async and await. Why is it important in general? Because when we write code, we typically have two sets of blocking operations. Blocking meaning that, technically meaning CPU thread is busy or waiting for something. So it's either working or waiting for something else to do its work. It pisses off our clients, makes our software irresponsive or unresponsive. When it comes to server-side software, it makes it unable to process more requests if our server is overloaded. When it comes to clients, just people hate it. And because probably most of you are developers, you can probably relate to this when Visual Studio locks up and you can't do anything about it. That's good examples of blocking UI. So blocking generally can be CPU bound, and I/O bound. And CPU bound operations you solve in a completely different way. You solve through parallelism and basically multi-core processing, or other ways. And I/O bound operations you typically solve through basically parallel execution through async programming in the same thread. Async await in C# is really all about code syntax. There's no threads. It's just a nice way to manage basically task execution and task returning. Before C#5, there was the task parallel library. It works great, but your code's pretty damn ugly. So async await got released with Visual Studio 2012. Basically improves your code flow and readability, and it sort of pushes developers to write more efficient code more easy, which is very important. When it comes to CSOM, why do we care about async await? Well, first, if we write a client application, maybe a WinForms application or a console application that calls out SharePoint through CSOM, it can be written in the async await pattern. Instead of doing crazy task processing, you can write good code. Essentially, it leads us to write good, efficient clients. On the server side, if we're writing something like an ASP.NET Web API or whatever is processing incoming requests, then reaches out to SharePoint through the CSOM library, we can potentially make this more efficient, quick to work. Basically, when code hits something that's async and it starts throwing off the I/O bound operation, your code flow gets released. Your web server can process the next request, and so on. Keep very important here. Async await is not about multi-threading. It's about asynchronous programming. Sorry, my voice is cutting off, and I've only spoke for 3 minutes. So enough talk. Those are my talking sessions. No questions. So straight into Visual Studio. This is a sample I put together. I have several different projects that will illustrate typical CSOM code. In the old days, what we typically do is get a client context object, maybe wrap it in the using statement so it gets disposed, load something in the context, and then do an execute query. If I run this, I'm sure everyone will understand this is a blocking operation. It'll take as much time as the load operation takes, plus the authentication that will wrap around. And once this is done, code will continue. This is a typical blocking operation. Our CPU does not depend on our memory or whatever. Does not, as much as CPUs we have, we're not going to improve this because it's an I/O bound operation. It reaches out to a third-party service, and that takes, in this case, it will take about half a second or 500 milliseconds to return. I want to see if there's any questions that will distract. No questions. So now we can write that with proper task execution, and here I've got basically abstracted away everything that's not important to show the example. So I'm using Python-style indenting just to confuse you people. But generally, we have a method that does work, and in this case, it's marked with async at the back, following design patterns. It is an async method, so this method in general is marked as async, and it has an await operator. Everything after the await operator will basically get executed after the task is completed. Anything before that will get executed obviously before, and the general rule of await is code flow gets returned to its parent and all the way back to the top. Notice my console application is not async, which means that we cannot await this method because C#5 will not allow us to do that. So this method will return a task object. The moment we get that task object, it's basically our ticket to our operation that's running basically in the message loop of the current thread. This line of code will get executed, so we're going to get logged straight away. Here I'm declaring a promise or a callback. Essentially, in C# we don't really call them promises, it's just a callback. So this thing creates a continuation that executes asynchronously once the task is completed. So continue with will essentially execute this code after the async operation. This line of code will execute, so the time difference between task instantiated and task starting and running will be exactly close to zero. It'll be very close to zero, much less than 1 millisecond. Task wait is the task object's way to say, okay, wait for the task to complete. And in our case, we're returning nothing, so we're returning a task. So we're not going to see .result here, which is typically something that you see in code that returns things. We're just going to see .wait. Once this completes, then we're going to exit the application. I have Fiddler here running. I'm just going to clean it up just so we can see what's going on in the background. I'm going to run this just to quickly show it. I've got 4 more minutes, which is not enough. So I'm using SharePoint Online Authentication. So these first 5 requests are using that. Everything's blocking. It's executing it sequentially. You can see the difference here is very little. Then we wait 800 milliseconds for the task to complete. So basically the first set of requests all the way up to here, we're dealing with SharePoint Online credentials or authentication, and everything from here below is dealing with my CSOM code. So the request did continue. This line did show. However, we're using here just pure task objects, and you notice our console application is not really marked as async. If we change the language of the project to C#7, we can actually get this cool benefit. We can get an async task main method as an entry point to our C# console application. Then we can properly write await code, so we can await this. We don't need to return it. We don't need to do anything with this task. We can get rid of this wait. I've been testing to break it. This will do exactly the same thing. However, if you run it, it'll just execute and do its thing. So this is a great example of how we can use an asynchronous console application and use ExecuteQueryAsync. Very funky if you do Azure Functions, because they support async all the way from the top, and execution gets pushed back to, in this case, it has nothing higher than the main method, so it works as efficiently as possible. Now, to show this in practice, I've taken the typical WinForms example, because WinForms 32 is essentially a main thread, which is our UI thread, and typically we do operations off the main thread through dispatches or through maybe threading or other difficult things. A typical event handler or button click event handler, if it's not marked as async in the language, the only thing that we can do here is we can execute a query. This will be a typical blocking application. I have a timer that shows that the UI is working or not. We can have an async button click. This will let us essentially do good code. We can call ExecuteQueryAsync. We can await it, get back the task, do nothing with the task. I'm putting this in a loop to essentially put some load on the WinForms application. And here I'm doing a quick hack, and this is the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm instantiating a new client context, I'm setting its authentication, and then I'm not loading anything, but I'm executing the query. The reason why I'm doing is so I get all my authentication handshaking out of the way, and then reusing my context in order to do load and operation stuff loading this. So I'm going to start this just to see it in action. This timer, I don't know if screen's updating that quick. This timer has a sync work, so that's my sync button. You can see the timer stopping here for probably about 500 milliseconds to a second. We can do that as much as we want. The moment I execute the async task, and I'm going to load Fiddler here on the side, so we can actually look at it in action. We can pull this off. So we're doing authentication, our timer is still counting, and then we're doing all of the process queries, and basically our UI is still running and being able to update itself. I'm using a WinForms timer, which actually creates a background thread. That's irrelevant to the point. The point is that we can fire this up multiple times, and you will see, if it's quick enough, a short delay here during authentication, but as long as process query is running, our thread is running. So it's pretty cool. Which leads us to one good practice in this case, and that good practice is just a reminder to reuse your client context. Never instantiate it in a loop, because you have the overhead of authentication handshaking. This particular example is using SharePoint Online credentials. I will test to see if authentication, handshaking is blocking with tokens and app-only contacts and things like that. At the moment I get time. But that is my demo. I'm exactly on time, and I just want to see Leo's comment. So yes, you can do get away to get result. That is the same as calling await. So if we go back to something like this particular code, of course, here I can say task object get awaiter. So here we get the awaiter, and then we can say get result. This will return a void because it understands that this particular method does nothing, which is essentially very close to this. Any other questions that I could help answer? This code is it's currently in our 1-bit software repository, but I'll put it as part of the samples in PnP just so this stays there. Having looked at throttling with the semaphore slim, no, I have essentially this will be throttled. So the fact that we are improving the client or the server only technically makes us do more requests, and we will be throttled. This does not affect Office 365 throttling capability at all. Okay. Any other questions, or should we give the deck to Erwin, I believe?
Mm-hmm. It's going to be me.
Good to hear your voice, Erwin. You're very calm, as always. So, Erwin, I guess I'm done. All yours.
Okay, I'll take over.
Okay, take over then.
I'm on my way.
What, you're walking here or something?
Yeah, sort of, yeah. There we go.
Yeah, it's handshaking. So
Right. You should see it. If someone can confirm.
Yep, screen is good.
Yep, good. Okay, so what I will show today is a few slides about PnP PowerShell Core, which is a working title. This does not necessarily be the end name of what we're doing, but for now we call it PnP PowerShell Core to differentiate it from PnP PowerShell. And I'll talk you a bit through what the challenges are and how our approach will be and why we're doing this. Why are we actually spending time on this? So the challenge is that we see actually more Mac and Linux users starting to develop solutions for SharePoint. And now that Visual Studio Code is multi-platform, you actually end up with development teams that are using different platforms. So people running Windows machines, people running Mac machines. However, there's a lot of investment out there already based upon the PnP PowerShell. A lot of scripts have been created. I mean, we're running over 1 billion requests per month just from PnP PowerShell towards Office 365. So it's a pretty popular tool to use. But if you run on a Mac and a Linux, you're sort of not part of that easy scripting world anymore. With over 250 commandlets to use. Now, another thing is that the future of .NET is actually pointing towards .NET Core, .NET Standard. That's where we're going. You see that Microsoft invests a lot in those platforms. And of course, .NET, the .NET framework, the main big .NET framework is still growing too, and is also still maintained, and new functionality comes out too. But they put a lot of effort in .NET Core and .NET Standard, and that makes sense because it's multi-platform. So PowerShell 5 is the current version that runs in Windows. So if you launch PowerShell in Windows 10, you will get PowerShell 5. But they've now recently released PowerShell 6, which is fully open source. And PowerShell 6 runs on Mac, Linux, and Windows. And that version is based on .NET Core and .NET Standard. Another challenge is that if we are moving over to .NET Core, if we think of .NET Core as the future where we're going, we have a problem with CSOM. And actually, the previous presenter, Radi, has been diving a lot into that in seeing if we could move CSOM over to .NET Core. And he came quite far, but there were still some bottlenecks with regards to authentication. So should we focus on that, or should we go for another way when it comes to PowerShell? Because PnP PowerShell behind the scenes uses CSOM. So I've been looking into that, and I came up with this. The idea is to port PnP PowerShell to .NET Standard. Not .NET Core, but .NET Standard. Because this will work both with Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core. So this will work both with Windows PowerShell 5 and PowerShell 6.0. So it doesn't matter which version of PowerShell you're running, it will work because Windows PowerShell supports .NET Standard and PnP PowerShell 6.0 supports .NET Standard. So how do we approach this? So first of all, very clear, we do not have the intention to port CSOM to .NET Core. Absolutely not in our roadmap. That would be crazy. It's going to be so much work. If someone would do that, I hope it would be Microsoft. But we from PnP will not go there. We will port PnP PowerShell to use the REST APIs. And we are familiar with limitations of REST. There are some things like, for instance, the combination of fields and content types. There are some side columns and content types. They have some challenges. There is currently no REST API for taxonomy, and tenant administration calls are not fully exposed at all, actually, in the REST API. Now, there are ways around that. One of the I don't want to necessarily call it a dirty hack, but a hack around it is by calling the client SVC directly, just the way as CSOM does it. Also to realize that if we move to a REST backend, so we call REST API from PowerShell, some low-level tasks will not work anymore. Some people have been doing that where you receive the context, you retrieve a web, you update the title, and you do update and you do an execute query. You're effectively writing CSOM code. That will not work anymore because we have REST behind the scenes and it works fundamentally different from CSOM. But we might have an answer there, which I'll show you right now. So let me show you where we are today. And let me pop up PnP PowerShell Core. So this is PowerShell 6.0. As I said, this is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux users. And it is simple install. You download the MSI, you run it if you're on Windows, and you're there. And they can live side by side. So it's not a replacement for Windows PowerShell. You can have Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core installed side by side. And if you install the commandlets, and the package is not available yet, so you cannot download this from the PowerShell gallery. But if you install the commandlets, your approach will be similar to the old-fashioned PnP PowerShell. You do connect PnP online, enter the URL, sharepoint.com, and I have a connection to the site. If I do get PnP list, idea is the same. So we output the same type of data. I can say get PnP content type. So the same type of data. You can see all the properties that come with that with those objects. You can all read them. So it's not only that what you see on the screen is what you get. We get actually more. So if I go, for instance, take a list, get PnP list, and I say test. There's my list. Put that into a variable. And look at the properties. You see that basically the majority of the properties are being exposed to the list, to the object here, and you can use that and read values out of it. And I said read values. So we have an approach. I am working on a approach which also might help you in updating things, but I'm not 100% sure if we want to go that road, because it is a bit of work also from a coding perspective. It's actually a maintenance issue. But I'll show you what we mean. So for instance, if we have this list and I have the title here is currently test, I can actually say title equals PnP rocks. How do I update this? Well, it's just a matter of saying update. You do not have to execute the query. The list title has been updated now already. So if I say get PnP list, you will see there is now a PnP rocks list here. So that is one of the approaches. The other approach would be that we create appropriate commandlets being set PnP list, where we expose all the properties on those commandlets instead. That it would be a more PowerShell approach of doing things. So with getter and setter commandlets. So it's not a given that this approach that I just showed you here, where you actually update a property, will be in the end product. One of the reasons there, the complexity is not necessarily the first level properties. It's actually second level or third level properties, where you can go into the permissions of a list, and in there you can find groups maybe, and in the groups you can go, so you can very deep. And then how do we generate the actually update REST query behind the scenes for that? We're thinking about this. So where are we today? Well, if we say get command module SharePoint PnP PowerShell Core, and put this in a variable as a count, we currently have 50. It's hard to see because it's actually just cutting off the screen. 52 commandlets we have currently. So it's actually quite a list already that we imported. Just to show you an overview of what we have, PowerShell Core. So the things around apps, custom actions, master pages, home page, event receivers, lists, they're there already. So base set of commandlets are there. How do we approach it? Well, one by one. We effectively do not have to rewrite much of the commandlets. We just basically copy the commandlet over to the new project, and then we rewrite every call to CSOM to a REST call, and we have helper classes to make our life a bit easier, so we do not have to rewrite all the connection code there. But basically, if we look in a commandlet here, for instance, the list commandlet you see here, where we execute, I can zoom in a bit, we have the REST request that we execute from the list's endpoint, and then we expand a couple of variables here, and then we return a collection of lists. So this is the approach we have currently. As I said, 52 commandlets, and because this is written in .NET Standard, the cool thing here is that if I go to the Windows PowerShell, I actually have, if I look here, get module, I have the same library loaded, and the same commandlets work here too. So it doesn't really matter which platform you're on. If you like Windows, if you do not want to install PowerShell 6, that's not an issue, you can still run it. Now, what is one of the limitations here? Because we do realize that the biggest use of PnP PowerShell is when it comes to the PnP provisioning engine. The PnP provisioning engine is by far the most complex part of the PnP code, and it's been written based on CSOM. Porting that one to REST will have its challenges. It is possible, we believe it's possible, but it will be a lot of work. It will not happen anytime soon, so it could very well be that the core PowerShell, whatever name it will have from PnP, will initially not support the PnP provisioning engine. But that is to be waited, and then we'll see when this comes out. And as I said, this is a preview. This is not publicly available yet. You cannot download this. It might be that in the very near future we just create a public repo where you can already contribute and make this happen, and build out the list of commandlets and port the commandlets. Right now, as I said, it's a one by one. So we just take an old commandlet, copy it over, rewrite some code, and it's part of it. So I haven't seen if there were any questions. So let me see here.
There's quite a few, Owen, so you might want to skim through them. I've been trying to answer a few.
Okay, let's go here. Mix it. Let me scroll a bit up here. Will my mixed scripts, from Marcel is asking here, mixed scripts with CSOM and PnP still work? No, because CSOM is not running in .NET Core. If you run on Windows PowerShell, you might be able to refer to the CSOM classes manually, but there is no CSOM support. So I'm also not saying this will replace PnP PowerShell. I do believe that the PnP PowerShell based on CSOM has a place, and CSOM is not going anywhere. So it will still be around PnP PowerShell. But if you run multi-platform or you don't care about calling CSOM things directly, then PnP PowerShell Core could be a solution. The beta available? No, not yet. It's not available yet. Could you mix it with classic PnP PowerShell? Well, the idea is, there's a question from Kevin. The idea is that we'll be full backwards compatible. So your old scripts will still run as long as you do not venture out into direct CSOM calls on objects. So if you stick with the commandlets only, then it should just work. There are some small changes. We're thinking of if we should support like classic artifacts, like for instance event receivers, and maybe only do remote event receivers and webhooks, those kind of things. But that's a question. But we try to be as complete backwards compatible as possible. Beta available pretty soon, I think. Pretty soon. I did not plan a release date yet of this beta. Ivan, Vesa is not around, but CSOM is not going anywhere. There are so many things depending on CSOM, and it's still a lot of things you can only do in CSOM and not in REST. So
the Office 365 portals use CSOM.
Yeah. Yeah,
so it's not going anywhere.
I mean, if you classic workflows or the not classic, but the current workflow engine, for instance, is also calling CSOM behind the scenes to do things. That's all. That's how workflow. Not talking about Microsoft Flow, but the standard SharePoint workflows. They're using CSOM to call back into the server. So CSOM is not going anywhere. Question from Andrew. Sunsetting. I don't know if we should. There are sort of, for now at least, complementary, especially for those scripts where you still want to call back into CSOM, in low-level CSOM. But as I said, as I demoed, we're thinking of providing you with a similar way of doing things, but we didn't crystallize yet. We're not sure yet, because I said the downside of that approach is that we would have to maintain the objects representing lists. For instance, we have to create objects based on a list and then expose the methods and properties to those. So that's going to be a bit of a maintenance hell we're getting into, because effectively we're maintaining sort of a lightweight version of CSOM then, and that would mean that every time a new version comes out and new properties are being released, we will have to update those objects or classes. So we're not sure yet, but we have. And this also one of the things right now, and we'll see how far we go with that, but this version will only support SharePoint Online. That's the current state. We're not looking at SharePoint 2013 or 2016 with PnP PowerShell Core. Marcel Walter asked if there's a plan of extending REST by Microsoft. Yes. They're constantly working on that. You might have noticed, for instance, the site design APIs, they almost come out first in REST and then CSOM. So the REST API has a strong focus for Microsoft. So basically everything comes out in REST first and then in CSOM. And some of the functionality doesn't even come out in CSOM. Take the ALM API to activate and install and deploy and publish apps. There is no CSOM equivalent. If you want to do that in CSOM, you will have to fall back to the PnP Sites core library. So there is no API for that in CSOM. Right, that was it for now. Sneak preview. In the coming weeks, we most likely will push this one out as a public repo, so you can have a look at it and play with it. If you're wondering, by the way, how we do the authentication, because this is not the classic authentication. I didn't demo that. I need to explain that a bit. We use the same way of authentication as the Office 365 CLI does. So basically, when you do a connection, you will we will launch a browser, and you will have to enter a code that is shown in PowerShell. From that moment on, we have a connection, we have an access token and a refresh token. That token we store in your credential manager on your local machine or on the Mac in the keyring or I'm not actually 100% sure what it's called on a Mac. Yes, it's a device login. From that moment on, we have an access token and a refresh token. And the moment the access token expires, we get a new one with the refresh token. And from that moment, you have a session. So that is it. As I said, 52 connectors currently. When we release this, which might be in a week, but not promising anything, we're probably going towards the 100 already. So it goes pretty smooth to move the connectors over. That was it for me. Over to Paolo.
Okay, thank you, Erwin. I will take over with the presentation and I will share my screen. So give me a few seconds to be ready to share it. And please let me know when you see my screen. And now we will slightly change the topic. We will talk about consuming, still about REST APIs, but about consuming SharePoint using the Micrograph. Because since a few months ago, we have the capability to use some of the functionalities of SharePoint Online through the Micrograph. I guess now you see my screen, but just let me know, please. Okay, cool.
All good, Paolo.
Okay, thank you, Radi. So this is just the entry point in the Graph API documentation about the endpoints or the actions to consume the SharePoint Online services through the Micrograph. And so far, the Micrograph makes it possible to consume sites, lists, and list items only, so we don't have the full set of capabilities that we have using the REST APIs, the native REST APIs of SharePoint Online. And my guess is that it will never happen to have a full coverage of the full set of REST APIs of SharePoint through the Micrograph, but we have some of the useful capabilities already there. So in this short demo, I will show you what is the procedure to be able to consume such API. So first of all, and as whenever you need to consume the Micrograph, you need to register an application in Azure Active Directory. And the application in Azure AD, from a settings perspective, will need to have a set of permissions for the Micrograph API. And specifically from a SharePoint perspective, there are some new permissions which are related to consuming the content or managing the sites that you have in SharePoint Online. So there are permissions like sites.read-all or sites.read-write-all, sites.manage, and site.full-control. And those permissions are available in the application permissions group or in the delegated permissions group. For example, in this app, which is the one I will use in the upcoming demo, I have, to make it easier, the full control permission, so site.fullcontrol.all for a delegated access token, so on behalf of my current user and not with an application only token. And through the UI of Azure AD, of course, you can set your permission. For example, here you can see the create, edit, delete items and list in all set collection, which corresponds to the site.manage.all permission, and so on and so forth. So you create an application, you register the application in Azure AD, you configure the API permissions for the Micrograph depending on what you want to do, and through the documentation, you can see what you will need. So, for example, if you want to get a single site using the Micrograph, you can see that those are the required permissions running as with the application-only token or with a delegated token, for example, and so on and so forth for all of the APIs. Moreover, here I have an ASP.NET MVC application, which is the app which is registered in Azure AD and which I'm working on. So it's not yet 100% completed. It will become a new demo in the PnP repo as soon as it will be fully completed. Right now, we have some of the capabilities which will be the ones I will show you now. And this application, let me execute it. It is should be already running in my browser. It's a very classic MVC ASP.NET application in which I have the capability to get, for example, a site object using the REST endpoint of Graph, and the site object can be retrieved either using the relative URL of the site and providing the tenant name, the SharePoint tenant name. I will show you pretty soon the code under the cover of this page. And whenever you get a site, you can get back some information, some properties about the site, including, for example, this kind of nice ID, which is made of the SharePoint tenant name, as you can see, followed by comma, a global unique identifier, which is the site collection ID, comma again, and the global unique identifier of the web site in the site collection, so that the Micrograph, which is basically a wrapper around all of the services in the back end of the Micrograph, will be able to convert this ID into the information needed by the SharePoint REST APIs to get a reference to that specific website. And using this application, you can make a query for a site either using the relative URL of the site or using the ID that we just copied from the other page, and we will get, of course, the same result. In order to do that, let me show you the code under the cover. We need, first of all, to use in ASP.NET ADAL, so Active Directory Authentication Library, as we usually do whenever we want to get an access token from Azure AD and to consume the Micrograph or any other API registered in Azure AD whenever we are in .NET. So I have just an helper function which will give me back an access token, and using that access token, I can make a GET request for the base URL of the Micrograph, followed by site, which is the entry point for the endpoint to access any site in SharePoint Online to the graph. And then I can provide either the unique ID of the site, which is the one I showed you, so the SharePoint tenant name, site ID, web ID, or I can just provide the relative URL right after the tenant name. So I can still provide the name of my tenant.sharepoint.com and followed by the relative URL of the site that I want to retrieve. They are both valid syntaxes to retrieve a site object. You will get back an object which will have some information like, for example, the creation date time, the last modified date time of the site, the description, the display name, and the ID we were talking about a few seconds ago, as well as the name and the URL of the site. Using the ID of a site, you can then retrieve, for example, the lists that you have in a site. So, for example, in this solution, if I click on the Show List button, I'm able to get back the list, which is a short one in this sample website, the list of lists and libraries that I have in my site. One more time, to provide this functionality, you simply need to get an access token, as always and as usual, and then you can get the site endpoint. You provide the ID of the site. Be careful. Here you can only provide the ID made of the tenant name, the ID of the site, and the ID of the web. The other identifier doesn't work, so the relative URL doesn't work right now in this syntax. And then you get the lists collection. You will get back an object, which will be just a container of a collection, of a list, of an array, whatever you like to use in your .NET code, of objects, which will be made again of a description, display name, the E tag, the ID, the name, and the web URL of the list, and some other information like, for example, who created the list and stuff like that. When you get back the list or the collection of lists, you can also use that endpoint to create a new list, for example. And here I have another function which will be able to create through a POST request, HTTP POST request, targeting the collection of lists in my target site, will be able to create a new list. To create a new list, you need at least to provide the display name of the list and the template that will be used to create the list. But you can also provide custom columns so that you will have a custom information architecture for your list. Right now, for the sake of simplicity, I will simply create a new list which will have a name which will be based on the current date and time. And if you see here, I have a list, most likely this one because it's 4:53 in my time zone. And this is the list I have just created. And as I told you, in order to create the list, you just need to make a POST request. You will get back a JSON object which will represent the just created list, so that you will be able to retrieve the ID of the list and play and being able to play with the items of the list. To do that, changing the context and moving to feeder just to show you the low-level REST requests, you can play like I'm doing here. So you can refer to the Micrograph version 1.0 because those functionalities are already available in the 1.0 endpoint of the graph. You get the site. As I told you, you get the ID of the target site, which is quite ugly, but it works. And you access the lists of lists in your site. If you want to access a specific collection of items in a list, you can just, let me see if I'm lucky enough, you can get, yes I am, you can get the collection of lists, you can provide the unique ID of the list and the items to get back the collection of those items, which will be, let me show you here, it will be just a collection of items. But you can also make a post request targeting the collection of items to create a new item. And you will need to provide a JSON object with the collection of fields that you want to fill, that you want to feed in the item that will be created. Of course, you can also update with a patch request a target item. If that will be the case, you will have to select the specific item ID in the collection of items in your list and provide the field. Please remember to mute your Microsoft, please. And you will have to provide the field that you want to update. As well as you can delete an item, still providing the item ID, the integer item ID, of the so the indexer of the item in the collection of items in your target lists. So pretty smooth, pretty easy to do. And right now, through the Micrograph, that's what you can do using SharePoint Online. So you can access a site, you can get the list of lists and libraries in a site or of the sub-sites in a site in which you are. You can play with the lists and you can create them, and you can play with the items. That's it so far. The demo I showed you will be available in PnP in the upcoming days as soon as it will be 100% completed, and will be there just to take inspiration or to learn about how to use those new APIs. And that's it on my side too. So we have maybe some questions. Can anyone point me to Graph Docs, Access Token Docs? Well, actually, if you want to learn about the Micrograph, you can just go to graph.microsoft.io. And this will bring you to the entry point from a dev perspective of the Micrograph. And under documentation, you will find a bunch of information, including how to get an access token and how to do all the things that you can do playing around the Micrograph. So that's the entry point, graph.microsoft.io. I think we have 2-3 minutes more for Q&A or random topics. And that's it on my side about consuming SharePoint Online through the Micrograph. So if there are any questions, any feedback or any other random topic, feel free to ask. Any example code for that? Yes, we already have in the PnP repo some sample applications to use the Micrograph, to show how to use the Micrograph. The sample I just showed you will become available in the upcoming days. Is not yet there, but it will become available pretty soon. But we already have, I think, 2 or 3 samples about how to play with the Micrograph in a .NET application. Yeah, we love Graph too. Yeah. Random question: do you prefer? Okay. Butter, peanut butter, definitely. Anything else? There is one question related to PnP CSOM. So, first, can you process PnP CSOM core PRs faster? Well, we are already trying to do our best. Keep in mind that we process most of the content in our spare time, and you all know that the spare time is always spare. So. But we are always trying to do our best, and we will try to speed up as much as we can, but no guarantee, no promises. Sorry about that. Anything else? We are approaching the end of the hour, so any expansion on Microsoft Teams for graphs? Well, if you want to know about what is coming next, you can just have a look to the beta reference, still going to graph.microsoft.io and then documentation, and there you will find a full set of beta functionalities. So as you can see there are some useful endpoints and actions related to the Microsoft Teams service, and keep an eye on this one, and here you will see what is upcoming. Of course, if you use the beta endpoint, there is no guarantee that it will work 100%, but it's a beta, so you should be aware of that. On the other side, whenever any action or any functionality will be moved from the beta endpoint to the v1.0 endpoint, feel free to use it in production and in your environment. Anything else? Let me try to read the other question. Within SharePoint client-side web part, there is a Graph HTTP client, but the permissions seem lacking to use Graph API. Well, about the Graph HTTP client in SPFX, I would suggest you to stay on hold, let me say, because something is changing, and in the upcoming days there will be some interesting news. And if you take a look, I'm talking with Michael, and if you have a look to the SIG call we made, I think, a couple of weeks ago, you will find a recording of a demo about how to use those new capabilities, which again will become available in the upcoming days. So stay tuned, and there will be a new client object and new technique to get an access token from Azure AD through ADA LJS, natively included in SharePoint framework. And third-party APIs too, yeah, and you will be able to use third-party API too. I think we hit the hour, so we should stop here. If there isn't anything else burning, I'm also asking to Erwin, Radi, and the other guys in the call if there is anything else burning, or we can just say thank you and close here.
I think we can close.
So thank you, guys. I will close. So
thank you, Paolo. Great demo.
Thank you, guys, and take care, and see you in the next SIG or in the monthly calls.
All right. Goodbye.